Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. Grant Mercer sat in his home office, studying the psychological profiles scattered across his desk. For 18 months, he had been documenting patterns of behavior, analyzing power dynamics, building a case that existed only in margins of notebooks and encrypted files. His specialty was toxic family systems, the subject of 3 published books that had made him modestly successful in academic circles. But this research was personal. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, March rain drummed against the windows of the modest 2-story house he'd bought after the divorce. Nothing like the Martinez estate where Dawn had grown up, but it was his. The custody agreement said every other weekend. He'd fought for more and lost. The Kirks had lawyers who billed 4 figures an hour and a matriarch who knew how to perform grief and concern for a judge. His daughter Whitney appeared in the doorway, 17 and sharp-eyed. She had Dawn's auburn hair, but Grant's analytical mind. Still working on it? The Easter dinner is in 3 days, Grant said. Your grandmother will be at her worst. Holiday gatherings, big audience, traditional family setting. All her triggers for demonstrating control. Whitney moved closer, studying the behavioral charts. And Sammy knows what to do. He knows to be himself. 10 years old, enthusiastic, loud when he's happy. She won't be able to help herself. Grant looked up at his daughter. You're sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. She twisted my ear until it bled when I was 8, Whitney said flatly. Because I laughed too loud at Uncle Rod's joke. Mom just looked away. I'm sure. The divorce had been brutal. Dawn's mother Irene had testified that Grant was psychologically unstable, that his research into family pathology proved he was paranoid and would poison the children against their mother's family. She'd cried on the stand, describing how hard she'd tried to welcome him into the Martinez family, how she'd overlooked his controlling behavior because she loved her daughter. The judge had found her compelling. Dawn got primary custody. Grant got supervised visits until he could prove stability. That was 2 years ago. In that time, Grant had done more than prove stability. He documented everything. His background in behavioral psychology meant he knew what to look for. The micro-expressions, the selective memory, the way Irene reframed every conversation to position herself as victim or hero. He taught Whitney to do the same. The recorder is voice-activated, Whitney said. I tested it yesterday. It looks exactly like my normal watch. Grant had spent months preparing Whitney for what he called the long game. Irene Martinez was a narcissist with a violent streak, protected by money, social standing, and a family that had learned helplessness was safer than resistance. She ran the Martinez Family Foundation, organized charity galas, posted Instagram photos of her grandchildren with captions about family values. The community saw a matriarch. Grant saw a predator. His phone buzzed. Dawn's name appeared. He let go to voicemail, then played it back on speaker so Whitney could hear. Grant, I need to talk to you about Easter dinner. Mom wants it at her house this year, and I really think we should keep things peaceful. For the kids. Please don't start anything. I know you think a pause. Just be civil. Okay. Whitney shook her head. She knows. She always knows when Grandma's going to lose it. Your mother is an enabler, Grant said. In some ways, that's worse than being the primary aggressor. She sees the abuse and chooses comfort over her children's safety. He'd understood this 18 months ago when Whitney had shown up at his door 3 hours past curfew, crying. She'd finally told him everything. The ear-twisting, the slapping, the degradation disguised as discipline. How Irene would smile sweetly in public and terrorize in private. How Dawn would say that's just how Grandma is and you're too sensitive and we don't air family business. Whitney had begged him not to confront them directly. She'll just say I'm lying. Mom will back her up. Please, Dad. There has to be another way. So Grant had found another way. He taught Whitney how to document, how to record, how to create situations where Irene would reveal her true nature. They'd practiced for months, psychology experiments in real time, with Whitney as his research assistant and co-investigator. It was unorthodox, possibly unethical by academic standards, but Grant had watched his daughter bleed from her grandmother's abuse while lawyers and judges told him he was paranoid. He was done playing by rules designed to protect predators. Friday, Grant said. Good Friday. Ironic. Whitney managed a small smile. Resurrection Sunday is going to mean something different for us. That night, Grant couldn't sleep. He reviewed everything again, the documentation, the plan, the possible outcomes. Irene would lose control. She always did at family gatherings when attention shifted away from her or someone violated her unspoken rules. Sammy would chew loudly or laugh too much or exist too enthusiastically in her presence. And Grant would finally have what he needed: witnesses. The Martinez family gathered for every major holiday. Howard, Irene's husband, would be there, a hollow-eyed man who'd learned to make himself small. Dawn's brother Rod would attend with his wife and kids. And crucially, Milton would be there. Dawn's younger brother, 22 years old with developmental delays that kept him childlike and dependent. Grant had his suspicions about Milton's accidents over the years: the broken arm when he was 12, the burn scars on his hands, the way he flinched when Irene raised her voice. But suspicions weren't evidence. Psychology papers weren't legal testimony. Grant needed the mask to slip in front of people who couldn't look away. His phone lit up with a text from Whitney. Can't sleep either. Watching Sammy sleep. He's so little, Dad. What if this makes it worse? Grant responded. We protect him by ending the cycle. Trust the process. 3 days later, Grant drove his children to the Martinez estate in the gated community where old money pretended to be humble. The house was a colonial revival with white columns and a circular driveway. Inside, Irene had set the dining room table for 15 people with her grandmother's china and fresh flowers from the garden. Grant, Irene said, greeting him at the door with a practiced smile. She was 63, perfectly coiffed, wearing pearls. So glad you could join us. Children, come give Grandma a hug. Whitney moved forward mechanically. Grant noticed the watch on her wrist, the one with the hidden recorder. Sammy bounced toward his grandmother, still young enough to not fully understand the danger. Not so rough, Samuel, Irene said, her voice sugary but with an edge. We're civilized here. Dawn appeared from the kitchen, looking tired. She'd aged in the 2 years since the divorce, stress lines around her eyes, her shoulders permanently tensed. She avoided Grant's gaze. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Rod's running late. The house smelled like ham and scalloped potatoes. Howard sat in his recliner, reading a newspaper, barely acknowledging the new arrivals. Milton was in the den, arranging plastic dinosaurs in careful lines across the carpet. Grant could hear him humming, the same tune he'd hummed since childhood when he was anxious. Milton, Grant said gently, stepping into the den. Good to see you, buddy. Milton looked up, face brightening. Grant, you came. Did you bring Sammy? We can play dinosaurs. He's here. Maybe after dinner. Mom says I have to eat everything on my plate. Milton said, his expression darkening. Even the parts one don't like. Or there's consequences. Grant felt his jaw tighten. What kind of consequences? But Milton had already returned to his dinosaurs, humming louder. The conversation was over. Dinner was served precisely at 6. Irene sat at the head of the table, Howard at the foot. Dawn, Rod and his wife Margie, their 2 children, Grant, Whitney, Sammy, and Milton, filled the sides. The table looked like something from a magazine. Picture-perfect family gathering. Rod, would you say grace? Irene asked. Rod, a corporate attorney who looked perpetually uncomfortable in his own skin, recited a prayer about blessings and gratitude. Grant watched Irene during the prayer. Eyes closed, serene expression, hands folded. She believed her own performance. The meal began quietly. Conversation flowed in safe directions. Weather, local news, Rod's latest case. Irene directed the discussion like a conductor, cutting people off when topics strayed from her approval, redirecting attention to herself at key moments. Sammy, who'd been quiet, started eating enthusiastically. He loved ham. At home, Grant let him be a kid, messy, loud, joyful. But here, every sound felt amplified. Sammy, sweetheart, we chew with our mouths closed, Irene said. Her tone was pleasant. A warning. Sammy nodded, trying to be quieter. But he was 10. Within minutes, he was chewing audibly again, happy in the moment, forgetting to perform restraint. Grant saw it happen, Irene's expression flickering from serene to cold in microseconds. Her hand twitched. Whitney's hand went to her watch, pressing the button. Howard stared at his plate. Dawn's eyes pleaded silently with Sammy to just behave, just this once. Samuel. Irene's voice had ice in it now. I will not tolerate poor manners at my table. Sorry, Grandma, Sammy said, trying to smile. Don't smile when I'm correcting you. Irene snapped. That's disrespectful. The table went still. Rod kept eating mechanically. Margie looked at her lap. Milton had stopped humming. Grant remained neutral, observant. He told Sammy to just be himself, to not walk on eggshells. His son didn't understand the psychological game being played. He was just a kid who liked him. He's just excited about dinner, Grant said calmly. No harm done. Irene's head turned toward him slowly. I don't recall asking for your parenting input, Grant. In this house, children learn respect. Mom, Dawn interjected weakly. Maybe we could just... Be quiet, Dawn. I'm speaking. Irene's attention returned to Sammy. Now, young man, I want you to sit up straight and eat properly. Can you manage that? Sammy nodded, scared now. The joy had drained from his face. He took another bite, trying desperately to be quiet. But in his nervousness, he chewed slightly louder than before. Irene moved fast, faster than Grant expected, even though he'd been waiting for it. She reached across two place settings, grabbed Sammy's ear, and twisted hard. Sammy yelped. She twisted harder until Grant could see the ear turning red, then white where her fingernails dug in. That's for chewing too loud, Irene said calmly. Then she slapped him across the face. Not a gentle correction, but a full strike that cracked through the dining room. Sammy's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Grant, waiting. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of his breathing turning into sobs. Everyone kept eating. Rod cut his ham. Margie moved potatoes around her plate. Howard stared at nothing. Dawn closed her eyes. Whitney stood up. Should I tell them what happened at your place last week? Whitney asked, her voice steady and clear. 17 years old and done with being silent. Should I tell them what Milton told me? See what the police gave me when I filed the report. The entire room went dead silent. Irene's face transformed, shock, then fury, then calculation. What are you talking about? Whitney pulled a folded paper from her pocket. This is a case number. Detective Morgan Garcia with Child Protective Services. She's really interested in your discipline methods, Grandma. Especially after I showed her the photos from last week. You little... Irene started to rise. Sit down, Irene, Grant said. His voice was quiet but carried authority. You're going to want to sit down. Howard looked up for the first time, confused. Dawn had gone white. Rod had finally stopped eating. Whitney, what did you do? Dawn whispered. What you should have done years ago, Whitney said. Last Tuesday, when you and Dad were in the city, Grandma asked me to bring Milton over to help her with yard work. I brought my phone. Milton told me things, Mom. Things about when he was little. About the burns on his hands. About why he's so scared of making mistakes. Irene was standing now, gripping the table. This is slander. You're a child who doesn't understand. I'm 17, and I understand exactly what you are. Whitney pulled out her phone, and Grant felt a surge of pride at his daughter's composure. I have videos. I have audio. I have text messages where you told Mom to lie to doctors about Milton's accidents. And as of 20 minutes before we got here, I have footage of you assaulting a 10-year-old boy in front of witnesses who did nothing. She held up her wrist, showing the watch with its tiny camera lens. The room erupted. Dawn was crying. Rod was demanding to see the evidence. Howard sat motionless, processing. Margie was pulling her children away from the table. Milton was rocking in his chair, humming frantically. But Grant only watched Irene. Watched her cycle through emotions, denial, rage, victimhood, landing finally on what he predicted, attack. This is your doing, she hissed at Grant. You've poisoned her against me. You've created these lies because you're bitter about the divorce. Everyone knows you're unstable. The judge said so. You probably edited those videos yourself. Actually, Grant said, standing up and moving to comfort Sammy. That's not how this works anymore. Technology has progressed. Forensic analysis can prove authenticity. And Whitney hasn't been the only one documenting. He pulled out his own phone. I've been recording too. Every interaction, every holiday, every exchange. 2 years of data. Patterns of behavior that would be really interesting to the police, to Child Protective Services, and to your board of directors at the Martinez Family Foundation. Irene's face went from red to pale. You can't. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll take those children away from you permanently. With what credibility? Grant asked softly. You just assaulted a child in front of 15 people. It's on video. Your own family watched you do it and said nothing, which makes them complicit. And this is just today. Whitney, show them the file. Whitney opened her phone and cast it to the large TV in the adjacent living room. Thumbnails of videos appeared, dozens of them, organized by date. Grandma grabbing my hair in the car. Grandma slapping Uncle Milton for dropping a glass. Grandma twisting Sammy's arm last Christmas. Grandma telling Mom to cover for her after she left bruises on my back. Dawn was sobbing openly now. I didn't know you. Whitney, baby, I didn't know you were recording. Because you didn't want to know, Whitney said, her voice breaking for the first time. You chose her over us every single time. Rod was staring at the screen, his lawyer brain working. Jesus Christ, Mom. This is felony child abuse. Multiple counts. This is evidence of witness intimidation. If Grant goes to the authorities. Grant corrected. When I go to the authorities. Monday morning. Detective Garcia is already involved thanks to Whitney's report. She's building a case. What happens tonight determines whether this stays in the family court system or becomes a criminal matter. Irene finally sat down, her performance abandoning her. For the first time, Grant saw her as she truly was, a woman who'd terrorized her family for decades, finally cornered. What do you want? She asked flatly. Full custody of my children, effective immediately, Grant said. Supervised visits only for Dawn, contingent on her completing therapy and acknowledging her role as an enabler. Milton moves out of this house into supported living. You resign from the foundation board, and you get psychiatric evaluation and treatment. And if I refuse, then Detective Garcia gets everything. The videos, the medical records Whitney accessed, the testimonies from family members I've been interviewing over the past year. You'll face criminal charges. Dawn loses custody for neglect. And I publish my findings. I've been writing a book, you see, case study of narcissistic abuse in affluent families. You make a fascinating subject. Irene looked at Howard. Her husband, silent for 30 years, stared back at her with something like satisfaction in his eyes. I want a divorce, Howard said quietly. I'm done. The foundation of Irene's world cracked visibly. Dawn was still crying. Rod was on his phone, already calculating legal strategies. Milton had stopped humming and was watching everything with wide, confused eyes. Sammy pressed against Grant's side, his ears still red. Whitney stood beside them both, no longer the little girl whose grandmother had terrorized her. She was a young woman who'd fought back with intelligence and evidence. Grant felt no satisfaction, only grim necessity. This was protection, not revenge. Though if he was honest with himself, the look on Irene's face when her carefully constructed reality collapsed, that felt like justice. Monday, he repeated. You have until Monday to decide. After that, the choice leaves your hands entirely. He gathered his children and left the Martinez estate, leaving behind a family in ruins and a matriarch who'd finally learned that power built on fear couldn't withstand the light of truth. In the car, Sammy was quiet. Whitney held his hand. Grant drove carefully, processing the enormity of what they'd just done. The plan had worked, better than he'd hoped. But plans are just strategies. The real work of healing would take years. Dad, Sammy said from the back seat. Is Grandma going to hurt me again? No, Grant said firmly. Never again. I promise. Did I do something wrong? With the chewing, Whitney turned around to face her brother. You didn't do anything wrong. Grandma is sick, and she hurt people when she was supposed to love them. That's on her, not you. Never you. Grant glanced in the rearview mirror at his son's confused, tear-stained face. 10 years old and learning that family could be dangerous, but also learning that truth could be a shield, that documentation could be power, that silence wasn't the only option. Monday morning came with rain. Grant arrived at the police station with Whitney and 2 years' worth of evidence organized in binders and thumb drives. Detective Morgan Garcia met them in a conference room, her expression professional but sympathetic as Grant and Whitney walked her through everything. "This is comprehensive," Garcia said after an hour of review. "Honestly, it's some of the best documentation I've seen in a child abuse case. You understand what's going to happen now." "Investigation," Grant said. "Interviews with family members. Medical records requests. Possibly criminal charges." Garcia nodded. "Your ex-wife will be investigated for failure to protect. The grandmother definitely faces assault charges, possibly more, depending on what we find with the younger brother. This is going to get ugly." "It's already ugly," Whitney said. "At least now it's ugly in the open." The detective smiled slightly. "You're a brave kid. Both of you." She looked at Grant. "And you? I have to ask. You're a psychologist. You knew exactly how to build this case. Some people might say you manipulated the situation." "I documented reality," Grant said. "I predicted behavior based on established patterns. Irene chose to assault my son. I just ensured there would be evidence when she did." Garcia considered this. "The ethical board might have questions about your methods. Let them. My priority is my children's safety. Academic ethics are secondary to that." The investigation moved quickly. Howard, emboldened by his declaration at dinner, gave a statement detailing 3 decades of abuse: emotional, psychological, physical. Milton, in a safe interview environment with specialists, shared stories that made the detectives' faces harden. Rod's children spoke up, describing incidents they'd witnessed. Even Dawn, broken and desperate to salvage something, admitted she'd known and done nothing. The local news picked up the story within a week. Prominent philanthropist under investigation for child abuse. Irene's face, usually photographed at charity events with a glass of champagne and a practice smile, now appeared above captions about criminal charges and protective orders. Grant read the coverage in his office, while Sammy did homework at the kitchen table and Whitney video chatted with friends who were suddenly very interested in her family drama. He'd underestimated how quickly this would become public, how hungry the media was for stories about the fallen elite. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Mercer? This is Janet Giles. I'm an attorney representing Irene Martinez. We need to discuss your recent actions and the fabricated evidence you've presented to authorities." Grant put the call on speaker and hit record. "I'm not aware of any fabricated evidence, Ms. Giles. Everything provided to Detective Garcia was authentic and has been forensically verified. You manipulated a situation to entrap my client," Giles said. "You coached your daughter to record private family moments without consent. You created a hostile environment designed to provoke a reaction. That's not evidence, that's entrapment. Entrapment is a defense against criminal charges brought by the government, not applicable in child abuse cases documented by victims," Grant replied. "I'm a psychologist, Ms. Giles. I study behavior. Irene's behavior was consistent and predictable because she's been abusing family members for decades. I simply documented what was already happening. We're prepared to file a lawsuit against you for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll seek full custody of your children based on your admitted manipulation and the psychological harm you've caused them by involving them in your vendetta." Grant felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice steady. "Please do. I'd love to defend this case in open court with all evidence presented publicly. The media attention alone would be fascinating. I imagine your client would enjoy that spotlight." Silence. Then, "My client is willing to negotiate." No negotiation. She faces the consequences of her actions. If she wants to avoid criminal prosecution, she cooperates fully with the investigation, undergoes court-mandated therapy, surrenders custody of Milton to his siblings or state care, and stays away from my children permanently. That's not a negotiation. That's the minimum. You're destroying a family. Irene destroyed this family years ago. I'm just making sure everyone can see the damage." He ended the call and sat back, adrenaline fading. The counterattack had begun. Irene had resources, money, lawyers, social connections. She'd spent decades building her reputation as a pillar of the community. She wouldn't go down without a fight. 2 days later, Grant received a call from Dr. Kenneth Franco, head of the ethics board at his university. "Grant, we need to talk about your research methods. There have been concerns raised." They met in Franco's office, a corner room with diplomas covering one wall and psychology textbooks lining another. Franco was 60, distinguished, and deeply uncomfortable with conflict. Someone filed a complaint. Franco said, "Not meeting Grant's eyes. Anonymous. Claims you used your children as research subjects without proper consent, that you've been conducting behavioral experiments on family members without institutional approval, that your work represents a serious ethical violation." "Let me guess," Grant said. The complaint came through Irene Martinez's legal team. Franco's expression confirmed it. "The source doesn't matter. The allegations do. Grant, I've known you for 10 years. Your work on family systems is brilliant. But if even half of what's alleged is true..." "It's not research," Grant interrupted. "It's protection. I documented abuse happening to my children using methods any parent would use: video, audio, observation. The fact that I have expertise in psychology doesn't make parenting into research. You publish papers referencing case studies that sound suspiciously similar to your family situation. Anonymized, with identifying details changed, following all ethical guidelines for case study publication. And those papers were about patterns of narcissistic abuse, not about my specific family. The fact that the patterns match doesn't make my family research subjects. It makes the patterns universal." Franco rubbed his temples. "The board has to investigate. You'll need to go on administrative leave during the review. Your classes will be reassigned. Your book contract might be suspended. My book is with a trade publisher, not academic press. They don't answer to your ethics board. Grant, I'm trying to help you. If you fight this, it gets worse. Take the leave, cooperate with the investigation, let things cool down. Irene Martinez has donated significantly to this university. The board is under pressure. So this is about money," Grant said flatly. "This is about institutional integrity and avoiding lawsuits." Franco finally met his eyes. "I'm sorry. I believe you. But belief doesn't matter when lawyers get involved." Grant left campus feeling the first real fear since Easter dinner. Irene was using her resources to attack his credibility, his career, his ability to provide for his children. If he lost his university position, if his book deal collapsed, if his professional reputation was destroyed, judges considered financial stability in custody decisions. That night, Whitney found him staring at his laptop, reviewing their financial situation. "Dad, what's wrong?" he told her. Watched her face cycle through anger and fear before settling on determination. "We knew she'd fight back," Whitney said. "Right? That was part of the plan. I underestimated her reach," Grant admitted. "She's not just defending herself. She's attacking our foundation. Trying to prove I'm unstable, that I manipulated you, that we can't be trusted. But we have the truth. Truth doesn't always win, Whit. Not against money and lawyers and institutional pressure." Whitney sat down across from him. "Then we need more than truth. We need allies who can't be bought." She was right. Grant had been thinking like an academic, building an airtight case through documentation and analysis. But Irene was playing a different game. Social, financial, political. He needed to adapt. Over the next week, Grant made calls. He reached out to Detective Garcia, who confirmed that the investigation was being stonewalled by the district attorney's office. "Someone's making phone calls," Garcia said. "My lieutenant is getting pressure to close this without charges. I've never seen anything like it." He contacted a journalist at the city newspaper who'd written about institutional abuse. She was interested but cautious. Without criminal charges, this becomes he said, she said. Rich grandmother versus bitter ex-son-in-law. I need more to make it a story that sticks. He talked to other psychologists who specialized in family trauma. Most were sympathetic but unwilling to get involved in what was becoming a high-profile case with potential legal repercussions. Then Whitney came home from school with unexpected information. "Dad, I found something. Remember Melody Barber? She graduated 3 years ago. She was Rod's secretary at the law firm? Vaguely. Why? She posted on Facebook about finding the courage to share her story. I messaged her. Dad. Irene babysat her when she was 8. For a whole summer. Melody says it was the worst summer of her life, but her parents didn't believe her when she said Irene was mean. She still has nightmares. Grant felt something shift. Other victims. There have to be others. Melody says Irene volunteered at a church daycare in the 90s, and she ran a mother support group where she'd offer to watch kids for free. Dad, what if this goes back decades? What if there are dozens of people? It was brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. One victim was a vendetta. Dozens of victims was a pattern. A pattern was prosecutable. Grant created a secure website. He sent out careful inquiries through social media and parenting groups, asking if anyone had experiences with Irene Martinez's childcare services. He offered anonymity and psychological support. He framed it as research for his book, which was true, just not in the way his critics would assume. The responses came slowly at first, then accelerated. A woman who'd been neighbors with the Martinezes in the 80s, whose daughter had been disciplined by Irene for tracking mud into the house, slapped hard enough to leave fingerprints. A former member of the mother's group who remembered Irene's increasingly harsh methods, the way children would cry when dropped off. A teenager who'd been hired to help at one of Irene's charity events and had seen her grab a child by the throat for spilling punch. 19 people total, ranging in age from 15 to 43. 19 people with stories. Some had physical evidence, old photos showing bruises, medical records from accidents. Others just had memories, but the details were consistent. Irene's methods, her justifications, even her exact phrases appeared across decades. Grant compiled everything into a comprehensive document. Then he did something risky. He sent it directly to the district attorney with copies to the media, the university president, and the board of directors at the Martinez Family Foundation. The subject line read, Pattern evidence of serial child abuse by Irene Martinez. 19 victims over 30 years. Irene's attorney called him an hour later, screaming about slander and harassment. Grant let her finish, then said, Every person in that document has agreed to give sworn testimony. Every medical record was obtained legally. If Irene wants to sue me for defamation, she can try. But discovery in that lawsuit would be very educational. You've destroyed her reputation. She destroyed 19 people's childhoods. I'm just making sure everyone knows who she really is. That night, the story broke nationally. Philanthropist accused of decades-long pattern of child abuse. The foundation's board held an emergency meeting and asked Irene to resign. The district attorney's office, faced with public pressure and overwhelming evidence, announced they were reopening the investigation with expanded scope. But Grant's victory felt hollow when Dawn showed up at his door at midnight, disheveled and desperate. You've ruined everything, she said, pushing past him into the house. My mother is facing criminal charges. My father filed for divorce. Rod won't speak to me because I knew and didn't tell him. The family business is collapsing. And for what, Grant? So you could prove you were right. So our children would be safe, Grant said quietly. So Milton would be safe. So 19 other people could finally be heard. You could have handled this privately. We could have gotten mom help, set boundaries, done therapy as a family. Instead, you made it a media circus. You used Whitney like a spy. Her voice broke. You turned our daughter into a weapon against my mother. Your mother turned our daughter into a victim, Grant said. I just taught her how to fight back. Dawn collapsed onto his couch, crying. Grant felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the weight of knowing this wasn't over. Dawn had lost her mother, her family identity, her illusions about who her family was. She'd chosen wrong at every opportunity, but she was still the mother of his children. Where do we go from here? Dawn asked finally. You get therapy, Grant said. Real therapy with someone who specializes in family trauma and enabling behaviors. You acknowledge what happened to Whitney, to Sammy, to Milton, to everyone. You face what your mother is and what you let happen. And maybe, eventually, you could be part of your children's lives again. But that's your work to do, not mine. She left without arguing. Grant stood in his quiet house, checking on his sleeping children before returning to his office. Whitney had sent him a text. Melody wants to meet. Says she has information about the foundation's finances too. Think that matters. Grant smiled slightly. His daughter had inherited his investigative instincts and his refusal to leave stones unturned. He typed back. Could be leverage if we need it. Set up a meeting. Somewhere public. They met Melody at a coffee shop downtown 3 days later. She was 24, a paralegal now, sharp and professional despite visible nervousness. I worked for Rod for 2 years, Melody explained, stirring sugar into her latte. I had access to family files. Rod was sloppy about security. One day I saw documents about the Martinez Family Foundation and got curious. Your mother-in-law, Mr. Mercer, she's been moving money. What kind of money? Grant asked. Foundation money. Into personal accounts. Not huge amounts, she's smart, but consistently over 15 years. Maybe 2 million total. She'd approve grants to nonprofits, but some of those nonprofits were fake. Shell companies. The money would bounce through and come back to her. Grant and Whitney exchanged glances. This was unexpected and potentially more serious than the abuse charges. Financial fraud involving a charitable foundation meant federal crimes, not just state-level assault charges. Why are you telling us this? Whitney asked. Melody's jaw tightened. Because that summer when I was 8, when she babysat me, she told me every day that I was worthless, that I was too loud, too messy, too stupid. She'd make me stand in a corner for hours if I made mistakes. She told me my parents didn't really love me, that they just wanted free babysitting. I believed her for years. I believed I was worthless. Her voice wavered, but she continued. I got therapy. I got better. But when I saw on the news what she did to your kids, to all those kids, I realized she's still out there, still pretending to be a good person, still hurting people. And she's been stealing money meant for actual charities while she does it. So yeah, I'll testify about the abuse and the fraud. Whatever it takes. Grant felt the final pieces falling into place. Irene wasn't just an abuser. She was a criminal on multiple fronts. The abuse case might be harder to prosecute given statutes of limitations and witness reliability issues. But financial fraud? That left a paper trail. I need those documents, Grant said. Can you access them again? I made copies before I quit, Melody said. Kept them as insurance. Rod's a good lawyer, but he's loyal to family first. I figured someday I might need proof of what I'd seen. She pulled a thumb drive from her purse. Everything's here. Bank statements, fake nonprofit registration documents, emails between Irene and Rod discussing creative accounting. It's not comprehensive, but it's enough to start a federal investigation. Grant took the drive carefully. You know what this means? Rod could face charges as an accessory. The entire family could be implicated. Good, Melody said simply. They all knew something was wrong and did nothing. Let them face consequences too. After Melody left, Whitney looked at her father with concern. Dad, this is getting bigger than we planned. Federal investigation, more charges, more media attention. Are we sure this is what we want? Grant thought about Sammy's ear bleeding on Easter Sunday, about Whitney's years of silent suffering, about Milton rocking and humming, traumatized into permanent anxiety, about 19 other victims who'd carried their pain for decades. We're sure, he said. We finished what we started. He contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division the next morning. The agent who took his call was initially skeptical. Rich families laundering money through charities was common enough that they needed solid evidence before investing resources. But when Grant sent the files Melody had provided, the skepticism vanished. Mr. Mercer, we'll need to verify these documents. But if they're authentic, this is significant. We're talking wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Your mother-in-law could be looking at federal prison time. Good, Grant said. Because state charges for child abuse are being negotiated down by expensive lawyers. Federal charges are harder to make disappear. The agent chuckled darkly. You've done your homework. I'm a psychologist who specializes in dysfunctional family systems. This is my area of expertise. The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI seized foundation records, federal prosecutors convened a grand jury. Rod Martinez was called in for questioning about his role as the foundation's legal counsel. The media coverage intensified. This wasn't just a rich grandmother who'd been mean to kids anymore. This was systematic fraud alongside systematic abuse, a complete exposure of a family's corruption. Grant received hate mail from people who thought he'd gone too far, who believed family problems should stay private. He also received thank you notes from Melody and other victims who'd finally been heard. The hate mail went in the recycling bin. The thank you notes went on his office wall. His university ethics investigation concluded with a split decision. Half the board wanted him fired for ethical violations. Half argued he'd done nothing wrong as a parent protecting his children. The compromise: 1 year administrative leave without pay, but no formal censure on his record. His book contract remained intact. Actually, the publisher was thrilled with the publicity and accelerated the release date. Dawn completed 8 weeks of intensive therapy and sent Grant a letter. In it, she acknowledged her failures as a mother and as a daughter. She took responsibility for enabling abuse. She asked if, eventually, she might rebuild relationships with Whitney and Sammy. Grant gave the letter to his children and let them decide. Whitney wanted time. Sammy, more forgiving by nature, agreed to supervised visits if his sister approved. Milton moved out of the Martinez estate into a supported living facility designed for adults with developmental delays. Grant visited him weekly, and Milton slowly began talking about his childhood. The fear, the pain, the confusion about why his mother hurt him. A therapist who specialized in trauma worked with him 3 times a week. Progress was slow but visible. Howard, freed from his wife for the first time in 3 decades, looked 10 years younger. He helped the FBI investigation willingly, providing testimony about Irene's control over family finances and her tendency to use money as a weapon. The divorce was bitter but one-sided. Irene had no leverage anymore. 7 months after Easter dinner, Irene Martinez stood before a federal judge and pleaded guilty to wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The child abuse charges had been partially dropped due to statutes of limitations, but she pleaded no contest to assault charges related to Sammy and Milton. The combined sentences, 12 years in federal prison. Grant attended the sentencing with Whitney. He'd expected to feel triumph. Instead, he felt relief. The cycle was broken. His children were safe. The other victims had been vindicated. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Grant ignored them until one asked, "Do you feel guilty for destroying a family?" He stopped, turned, and spoke directly into the cameras. "I didn't destroy this family. Irene Martinez destroyed it decades ago with abuse, manipulation, and fraud. I simply documented reality and ensured she faced consequences. If that makes me a villain in some people's eyes, I can live with that. My children can live, period. That's what matters." Whitney stood beside him, no longer a victim or a child, but a young woman who'd learned that truth could be power if wielded carefully. They went home to a quiet house where Sammy was building a complex Lego structure across the living room floor, humming happily, secure in the knowledge that no one would hurt him for making noise. Grant's phone buzzed with a message from his publisher. "First chapter of your book just hit #1 on Amazon pre-orders. Title: The Glass House. Exposing Narcissistic Abuse in American Families." "Congrats, Grant. You're going to help a lot of people." He replied with thanks, then closed his laptop. The book will be published. The story would reach wider audiences. Other families might recognize themselves in the patterns and find courage to break their own cycles. But right now, in this moment, Grant just wanted to sit with his children in their safe, quiet house and breathe. Whitney brought him coffee without asking. Sammy showed him the Lego spaceship in progress. Outside, autumn leaves fell in golden drifts. The worst was over. The healing had begun. Grant's phone rang one more time. "Howard Martinez." "Grant, I wanted to thank you for having the courage to do what I couldn't." "You're doing it now," Grant said. "That counts." "I'm taking Milton on a road trip next month," Howard said. "Just the 2 of us. National parks, no schedule, no pressure." He He's never been allowed to just exist without someone criticizing everything he does. I want to show him what that feels like. Grant smiled. He'll love that. Send pictures. After Howard hung up, Grant looked around his home. Not perfect, not magazine-worthy, just real, just safe. Whitney caught him smiling. What are you thinking about? Victory, Grant said simply. Real victory. Not revenge, not destruction. Just protection and truth. That's enough. Is it weird that I missed the planning? Whitney asked. Like we spent so long building the case, documenting everything, strategizing. Now it's just normal life. Normal is underrated, Grant said. We've earned normal. But normal didn't mean stagnant. Over the following year, Grant's book became a bestseller. He was invited to speak at conferences about recognizing and documenting family abuse. He worked with lawmakers on legislation improving child protection. Whitney started a nonprofit helping victims of family abuse learn documentation and legal navigation. She called it the Glass House Project after her father's book. Sammy recovered remarkably well. Children were resilient when given safety and support. He joined Little League, made friends, laughed loudly at dinner without fear. The scar on his ear faded to a faint line that would probably disappear entirely by adulthood. Milton thrived in supported living. He got a job at a pet store, where his gentle nature made him popular with customers. He still hummed when anxious, but the anxiety was fading. He started painting abstract watercolors that his therapist said were processing trauma in healthy ways. Dawn rebuilt slowly. She completed therapy, got her own apartment, and worked on herself before asking for more time with her children. When Whitney finally agreed to regular visits, they met at neutral locations and talked honestly about the past. Healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. The Martinez Family Foundation was dissolved, its remaining legitimate assets distributed to actual charities. Rod Martinez faced ethics charges from the state bar, but avoided criminal prosecution by cooperating fully. He left his firm and started a small practice doing contract work, no longer part of the family power structure. 2 years after Easter dinner, Grant stood in his backyard watching Sammy's 12th birthday party. Kids ran through sprinklers. Music played too loud. Chaos reigned. It was perfect. Whitney, now 19 and in college studying psychology and law, handed him a soda. You know what the best revenge is? She asked. What's that? Living well. All of us living well. While she sits in federal prison. Grant clinked his soda against hers. That's not revenge, kiddo. That's just life. The life we've built because we refuse to stay silent. Howard arrived with Milton, who immediately joined the younger kids in the sprinklers despite being 24. His laughter was unself-conscious, joyful, free. He's never done that before, Howard said quietly, watching his son play. Never just laugh like that, without worrying about consequences. Better late than never, Grant said. As the party wound down and kids went home sticky with cake and sunscreen, Grant cleaned up while Whitney helped Sammy open presents. A normal family evening. Hard-won, carefully protected, infinitely precious. His phone buzzed with an email from a reader. I read your book. I recognized my own family in your words. Today I filed a report about my father's abuse. For the first time in 30 years, I feel like maybe I can break free. Thank you for showing me truth can be powerful. Grant saved the email with dozens of others like it. Every story mattered. Every person who found courage through his words validated the risk he'd taken in exposing his own family's darkness. That night, after the kids were asleep, Grant sat in his office and opened a new document. His publisher wanted a second book, and he had plenty of material. But this one wouldn't be about exposure or documentation. This one would be about recovery, how families rebuilt after trauma, how children healed, how truth could be the foundation of something better. He titled it, After the Glass Breaks, Rebuilding Family in the Aftermath of Abuse. The words came easily. He'd lived this story. He was still living it. Every day, his children laughed without fear was a paragraph. Every milestone Milton reached was a chapter. Every victim who found their voice was a conclusion that mattered. Grant Mercer had gone to Easter dinner 2 years ago, knowing his mother-in-law would reveal her true nature. He documented it, exposed it, and systematically dismantled the structure that had protected abuse for decades. He'd used his expertise, his intelligence, and his determination not for revenge, but for protection. The cost had been high. Relationships destroyed, family fractured, years of emotional labor. But the alternative had been watching his children suffer in silence, trapped in a cycle that would repeat through generations. He'd chosen truth. Difficult, uncomfortable, sometimes brutal truth. And from that foundation, he built something real. That was enough. That was victory. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.